Hello everyone and welcome back to our reading of Atlantis. Today we ask the question, was Atlantis the lost Minoan Empire? The ruins of a lost civilization have been uncovered on Crete, an island near Greece in the Mediterranean Sea. This Minoan civilization fits much of Plato's description of Atlantis. There are, however, some differences between the dates reported by Plato and those that modern scientists believe are the actual dates of Minoan civilization's existence and destruction. But those who believe that Crete is Atlantis have found a very neat explanation for that. Plato may have unintentionally made mathematical and measurement errors. Let's take a look at how well Crete fits the Atlantean description. Crete was the center of the great Minoan Empire that flourished for 2,000 years. Its influence covered the entire Mediterranean area. Minoan merchants traveled and traded widely from Syria to Sicily and to Western Europe. K.T. Frost, a classical scholar at Queen's University in Belfast, Ireland, wrote that sea trade between Europe, Asia, and Africa was controlled by Crete. Little was known about the Minoans until early in the 20th century, when excavations revealed their buildings, pottery, and other artifacts on the islands of Crete and nearby Thera, or Santorini. The Minoans appear to have been wealthy and sophisticated, leaders in fashion, jewelry, artwork, and metalworking. They loved sports, music, and dancing. They had a tradition of bullfighting without weapons. Excavation also revealed that the Minoans had indoor bathrooms with running water. Excavations at Knossos, Crete. Sir Arthur Evans, an English archaeologist, first began excavating at Knossos, Crete in the early 1900s. Ancient Greek myths had told of Crete's king Minos and his bull god Minotaur, who was half human and half bull. King Minos had housed this creature in a palace called the Labyrinth, a palace constructed with intricate alleyways and blind passages. In other words, a huge maze. Evans's excavations showed that King Minos was no myth. The palace complex was so large and intricate that it could indeed have been a labyrinth. The civilization that Evans unearthed was called Minoan, in honor of King Minos. Evans's work revealed considerable information about a previously unknown Bronze Age empire. Other palaces and buildings were also uncovered on the island of Crete. Evans estimated that this advanced civilization had reached its height around 1600 BC. During the next 100 to 150 years, however, something happened to destroy this mighty nation. But what had brought it down? In many of the buildings he unearthed, Evans found evidence of fire. Had the fires been set by humans, or did some natural disaster cause them? The answer eluded Evans and his associates. A daring new theory. The discovery of Knossos and other archaeological treasures on Crete caused great excitement and inspired a daring new theory. Sites for Atlantis had already been claimed all over the world, but now scholar K.T. Frost suggested a new idea. Crete was the basis for Plato's Atlantis story. According to Frost, the explanation of Plato's story requires that we examine Atlantis from the Egyptian point of view. After all, the story was handed down to Solon from the Egyptian priests in about 600 BC. Frost asked, what if Plato was simply repeating the description that the Egyptians gave Solon? What if all the geographic information was given from the original Egyptian perspective? Atlantis' location. Plato wrote in Timaeus, "There was an island situated in front of the straits, which you call the Pillars of Hercules. Now, in this island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire, which had rule over the whole island and several others, as well as over parts of the continent." If a ship were sailing from Egypt, Frost said, then Crete would be in front of the pillars, and the Atlantic would be behind them. Had the seekers of Atlantis been looking in the wrong direction? According to Frost's theory, Atlanteans would have ruled other islands and continents within the Mediterranean, not in the Atlantic and beyond. After all, the Minoans were said to have ruled far and wide at the peak of their power. Frost blamed a foreign invasion, an invasion from the Greek city of Mycenae, for the Minoans' downfall, and the disappearance of Atlantis. When Minoan trading ships disappeared from the seas, it seemed to the Egyptians as if the Minoan Empire had been swallowed up by the sea. According to Frost, there were several reasons for believing that Crete was Atlantis. The description of the harbour and the amount of trade was certainly an accurate portrayal of Minoan activities. He also cited the elaborate bathrooms of the palace and the bold rituals of Crete. Lyra. Decades later, in the 1930s, Spyridon Marinatos, a Greek archaeologist, proposed that it was not Crete, but the nearby island of Lyra that was Atlantis. Lyra, or Santorini, is an island about 60 miles north of Crete in the Aegean Sea. A powerful volcano destroyed much of the island about 1500 BC. In fact, the volcano sent the center of the island and part of its coastline into the sea. Marinatos theorized that the eruption of Lyra's volcano set off floods and earthquakes that destroyed Crete's civilization. The eruption formed a large caldera, or collapsed area. In his book Lost Atlantis, J.V. Luce described the caldera as a giant bay with shorn-off cliffs which stand as mute reminders of the volcanic violence to which the island has been subjected. It was as though some gigantic mine had been detonated deep below the center of the island. Volcanic eruptions. The eruption of Lyra is believed to have been 4 times more powerful than the dramatic 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, a small volcanic island in Indonesia. Krakatoa and Lyra are volcanoes of the same type. Reports of the Krakatoa eruption can give us an idea of the devastating effects of Lyra's eruption. The Krakatoa eruption was preceded by several years of earthquake activity. These earthquakes even shook Australia. In May 1883, a medium-sized eruption could be heard for 100 miles. The volcano spewed forth pumice, a light-weight porous volcanic rock that continued to rain on the island for days to come. Then, in August of that same year, the major eruption filled the skies with volcanic ash. All 3 volcanic cones were active. The cones collapsed one at a time. When the third and largest one caved in, it took 2/3 of the island's center with it. This caldera is only 1/4 the size of the one on Lyra. The explosions on Krakatoa could be heard thousands of miles away. The air around the globe vibrated. The collapse of the cones sent enormous walls of water crashing against the coasts of Java and Sumatra. The waves were estimated to be between 45 and 100 feet high. These massive water attacks, called tsunami or tidal waves, also sent fires raging through the villages as household lamps overturned and started blazes. Could this explain the evidence of fire found in the excavations on Crete? Marinatos believed that the same phenomenon occurred when Thera erupted. Marinatos studied the eruption of Krakatoa carefully. He was sure that Thera's eruption explained the devastation found under the layers of ash in the excavation at Crete. The eruption of Krakatoa brought down 8 square miles of the island. The eruption of Thera brought down 32 square miles. Think of the terror that it must have caused, Marinatos observed. In ancient times, surely people must have thought that the gods had turned on them, and that the earth was being destroyed. Tsunami. According to Marinatos, the tsunami must have destroyed Crete's fleet of ships and its economy. It also left the island nation undefended. Only Knossos remained, but not in its one-time glory. By 1400 BC, even Knossos was abandoned. The Mycenaeans conquered the island with little resistance from its inhabitants. A mathematical error? Marinatos' theory sounded plausible, but there remained many unanswered questions. How does the date of the Thera eruption compare to the dates given by Plato for the destruction of Atlantis? Were Crete and Thera too small to be Plato's Atlantis? Seismologist Angelos Gallinopoulos suggested that Thera was part of Plato's Atlantis. He said Thera could have been the fantastic city so carefully described in Plato's Critias dialogue. Gallinopoulos pointed to the passage in the Timaeus dialogue that said that Atlantis had rule over the whole island and several others. Might Thera have been one of the several others? Gallinopoulos based his argument in part on his own theory about Plato's math in the Critias dialogue. He reasoned that Plato's numbers were 10 times too large. Plato had said that the fertile plain was about 2,000 stadia wide by 3,000 stadia long. That was too large an area for the Aegean Sea, but what if you divided by 10? That would leave an island 200 stadia by 300 stadia, a reasonable size for an Aegean island. The mathematical error would also explain the dating problem. Plato dated Atlantis at 9,000 years before Solon's 600 BC visit to Egypt. Divide 9,000 by 10 and that leaves 900. Add 900 years to Solon's 600 BC and you get 1500 BC, the time of Thera's eruption. Gallinopoulos explained the mathematical error by saying that either Solon had made the error or the Egyptian priests had made the mistake. The Egyptian symbol for 100 may have been confused with that for 1000. Gallinopoulos reduced all the numbers greater than 1000 by dividing by 10. That made the size of the army, which Plato reported as being in the hundreds of thousands, more reasonable too, but Gallinopoulos left as accurate the measurements for the city. Gallinopoulos' scale drawings of Thera and Plato's metropolis of Atlantis were almost a perfect fit when one was placed over the other. Gallinopoulos also showed that there were traces of canals on the water-covered floor of the caldera. Marjorie Bramer, in her book Atlantis, the biography of a legend, states the presence of these channels indicated to Galenopolis that when Thera was a single round island, there could have been natural rings of land and water in the center. The Acropolis would have been the cone itself. Although Thera was the right size to be Plato's metropolis of Atlantis, there was still a problem of the very large Atlantean plain. Even if the measurements were cut to a tenth of Plato's dimensions, it still would not fit on Thera. Galenopolis had an explanation for that. Readers had all assumed that the plain was adjacent to the great metropolis. But Plato did not explicitly say that. The plain around the royal city could have been on the island of Crete. The Messara plain of central Crete fits the scaled-down dimensions suggested by Galenopolis. Cultural proofs. Galenopolis pointed to other proofs of his theory. Crete had great forests, and it had used its rich resources to build mighty ships. So did Plato's Atlantis. He referred to the red, black, and white rocks of the Therian cliffs and those in Plato's description of Atlantis. He pointed to the great baths and springs of both societies. He pointed out the sacred place of the bowl in both Atlantean and Minoan folklore. Wall paintings at Knossos depict the deep blue robes of priests. These robes fit the description given by Plato for the robes worn by the Atlantean kings during the bowl rituals. Galenopolis and Marinatos and others have done extensive excavation on Crete and Thera. The very fact that there is physical evidence of a civilization makes the Aegean theory of Atlantis an attractive one, because there is finally something concrete to look at and study. However, there still has been no evidence that specifically links Thera and Crete and the Minoans with Atlantis. Critics tend to focus on Galenopolis' theory about Plato's math. Archaeologist Peter James says there is no good reason to knock a zero off the date, and to divide some numbers by 10, but not others. This may make for a nice fit, he says, but there is no reason to believe that Plato made a mathematical error. James points out that Plato made it clear that he was referring to a period of great antiquity, a time longer than 900 years before Solon's visit to Egypt, and there is no reason to believe otherwise. Still, James suggests that Plato's 9,000 years should not be taken too exactly either. He maintains that the ancient civilizations exaggerated their ages to compete with each other. J.V. Luce agrees. He states that there is no call to juggle with the figures by knocking off a zero. 9,000 years, I now think, is his round figure way of indicating an early date by Egyptian standards. Classics professor Edwin S. Ramage also does not think that Thera and Crete were the same place as Atlantis. Plato claimed that Atlantis completely disappeared into the water, but the volcanic eruption of Thera left part of Thera and all of Crete still above water. Geologist Dorothy Vitaliano does not agree with the Aegean theory of Atlantis for a number of reasons. She argues with Galenopolis' claim that there are traces of Atlantis' harbors in Thera's waters. The exact physical features of the place before the collapse would have been buried by lava, she claims. Vitaliano also cites some archaeological problems with the Galenopolis theory. She claims that the acceptance of this theory would depend heavily on Thera's eruption, having occurred close to the time of Crete's destruction. However, she says there may be a difference of 50 years between Thera's eruption and the demise of the Minoan Empire. Peter James also argues that Crete survived the eruption by 50 years or more. Vitaliano says that natural disaster alone could not have been responsible for the downfall of Crete and the Minoans, but natural disaster may finally have weakened it enough for human invaders to have taken power away from the Minoans on Crete. She insists that if natural disaster was not the sole cause of Crete's destruction, then Crete or Thera could not have been Atlantis. What do you think? Was Crete the true location of Plato's Atlantis? Did Plato's dialogue contain a mathematical error, or should we look elsewhere to explore the prehistoric mystery of Atlantis? A fine question, and I think we're going to be looking elsewhere regardless. Anyway, I'll see you next time. See ya!